Welcome to the Aviation Pros Podcast, the go-to platform for professionals in the aviation industry. Powered by AviationPros.com, the leading source for comprehensive news, insights, and data on airport operations. Whether you're focused on airport management, improvement programs, ground handling, equipment, MRO, or FBO operations, we've got you covered with the expertise and resources you need to stay ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Aviation Pros Podcast. I'm Joe Petrie, Editor-in-Chief for Airport Business. Not every passenger moves through an airport the same way, and that's becoming a major challenge for terminal design and revenue strategy. From travelers sprinting to the gate to those arriving hours early to explore, understanding behavior is becoming as important as the forecasting of demand. In this episode of the Aviation Pros Podcast, I'm joined by Joe Barden, Executive Vice President of Terminal Planning at Landrum and Brown, to break down the four passenger personas shaping airport design and what airport leaders need to rethink to meet evolving expectations. Thank you very much for speaking to me today. Obviously, there's a lot of different topics and challenges that the airports are facing with right now. And I was really struck by this whole concept of the passenger persona and basing a strategy around it when it comes to, different types of terminal design and planning and things like that. So my first question is talking about at a high level, what are the four passenger personas discussed? The camper, the roamer, the explorer, the sprinter, and why should airport leaders care about this framework?
Well, thank you first for inviting me, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. And an answer to your question is that we like to call these different quote unquote titles of passenger typology. Really, and again, you mentioned it, we've kind of coined the sprinter, camper, roamer, and explorer. And I can go into how we even started this is that I think that it's really important for airport operators, and others in the industry to understand that we as human beings that enter and engage in an airport terminal and an airport environment, physical environment on a regular basis, display specific behaviors, right? We all have patterns of travel. We all have a specific sort of way that we typically travel, and we're all different in that manner. And there isn't really a lot of information, or hasn't really been a lot of information throughout my career on behavioral pattern types of passengers and how that affects the overall experience within the facility, especially when you're a planner and a designer like me. How do you take that into account when you're planning and designing facilities? We kind of chuckle a little bit with these names. There may be more and there may be subsets of them, but essentially what we've coined is sort of four different passenger types of behavior, four different passenger typologies. The first one is a sprinter. A sprinter is a passenger that pretty much arrives at the airport somewhere between an hour and 5 or an hour and 10 minutes or less. They're either in a hurry by design, or they're in a hurry because they're running late, right? So there is a majority of passengers that I'm seeing right now in the United States that are actually kind of get close when they're traveling through a terminal. That they're arriving an hour or less before departure, and we call that one a sprinter. Then there's the camper. It's a passenger that typically arrives somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half prior to departure, and they essentially go right through security, and they go to two places. They either go to the departure lounge and sit there, or they go up to the business lounge if they're a business traveler that has the airline membership or the credit card membership that allows them to do that, and they don't really interact with the facility in terms of concessions unless you've created an environment for them to do that. The roamer is pretty much the majority, I think, of travelers are roamers. They're ones that go through security after arriving somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours before departure. They're not afraid to engage in concessions. They're not afraid to go get grab and go food or fast casual before the departure, and they're familiar with the terminals. And then the final one is the explorer, which is kind of a niche typology. It's the person that loves airports. I'm an explorer. I love to get to the airport 2.5 hours before departure, because I want the time to be able to decompress, to use the club, to check out what's going on in terms of concession opportunities, and often some of the things that airports offer for passengers now in terms of amenities.
Now, as far as these personas, how did your organization or yourself identify them, and what data trends underpin them?
I think it kind of started right about 6 years ago during the pandemic. I think there was a period of time, Joe, when some of us that are terminal planners and designers and architects had a little time on our hands. So I started to travel a lot, just to kind of observe the state of the industry when I had some time. And what I was starting to contemplate was, I think airports up until the pandemic, and by the way, when we talk about what was the pandemic, COVID, we didn't really know in any way what was going to happen during it or after when it came to airline traffic, right? It was literally an ongoing situation that we just didn't know what was going to happen. So I started to think to myself, airports and airport operators have done a really fantastic job up into COVID, converting what we used to talk about as passengers to then customers, and then beginning to address everyone's needs in their facilities in a very unique and special way. So the question that I posed to myself and to some of my peers in the industry during the pandemic was, let's forget about customer experience if you can for a second, and let's think about customer expectations as they come back from the pandemic. And of course, we all know that, besides the long drag on low traffic, as soon as the pandemic ended, the traffic bounced right back. And so that kind of evolved into this thinking that, we probably need to think about these expectations, and these expectations are going to come from different types of passengers with different expectations based on their behavioral patterns. And so, just internally, we have a lab at Landrum & Brown. We came up with these 4 typologies. And like I said, there's probably a lot more, but they're probably subsets. These are really kind of unique and do encapsulate the majority of travelers. And we did not do any, hard surveys or any kind of data collection. It just came from intuitive knowledge from, 30 years in the industry of designing and planning airports across the world, and just, sort of ad hoc talks with peer airports, meaning my friends my age that were running airports, and also colleagues in the industry that were consultants. And it started to gain some traction. And here we are. We had just come back I just come back from Passenger Terminal World Expo in London, and we had this presented at our booth under Sidara. We are part of the Sidara companies, which is a collection of really best-in-class, consultants and designers. We design, airports worldwide. And at our booth, we had this interactive survey. And so we were able to kind of track what the percentage of these types of passengers were based on geography, because people would fill out essentially, their name and where they were from. And that was really the first sort of data point that I got back as a sample size to prove or disprove my proportion of percentage of passengers and types. And it came back pretty consistent, Joe, from what we had guessed as just from intuition and experience in terms of, the majority of passengers. It's interesting. What we found out was that there's a big chunk of people in the United States that get to the airport an hour or less. I was really surprised. It was something like 33% when I could have coined it at 20. And, the roamer, the most typical one, the one that gets there 2 hours or less and has no problem finding concessions and finding their way around, it's about 40% of the people in the United States, which makes complete sense to me.
So that being said, there's these different personas that are, common seen around as far as with the travel. How should terminal design evolve to simultaneously serve passengers who want to dwell longer versus those who are trying to move as quickly as possible?
Well, that's an interesting question, because you can't address every single passenger type to an extent, but you're not going to be able to solve everybody's expectations, as I like to say. What I like to say is that, when you're designing facilities, you just have to keep in mind that passengers and customers exhibit an array of emotions and behaviors while inside an airport terminal. And in fact, I'll go a little bit further. As an architect, and I've got general consensus among my architectural peers, there really are no building types other than airports and hospitals that are public and open to the public, where the full range of emotions are on exhibit every day. Like, for example, today, especially with what's going on with the security and the TSA, quote unquote, not being paid, you know, airports are one of the most stressful facilities to be in terms of a public facility today as we speak. And one can imagine that that is the case with a hospital on a regular basis, right? And then in terms of the range of human emotions, there's joy, there's sadness, there's always constant anxiety, there's complacency and contentness, but, there's also grief too, and that happens on a regular basis inside an airport. So designers, airport operators must be very aware of this and trying to pay attention during design of catering to all these needs. Regarding, the sprinter, in terms of how you would address that person and all of them, we have specific, kind of goals in mind that we try to do in design to attack that. And like, for example, this sprinter, somebody that's time compressed, right? As we're seeing, it's the rollout of biometrics, and the TSA has just begun, some test studies or test cases or test markets, Dallas, where I live, being one of them, for biometric enter the checkpoint. No interaction with an agent. You look into the camera, and boom, you're inside the checkpoint. That is something that addresses the need for the needs that sprinters have to move very quickly through a facility. The camper, the person that sits, whether it's in the club or the hold room, the departure lounge, the challenge for airport operators is, how do I get that person engaged with my facility to spend some money, right? I can provide them, and we encourage airports to provide people that like to sit in the departure lounge varieties of seating, soft seating, groups, families that like to quote unquote camp in the hold room for a reason. They don't want their kids running all over. So provide seating that allows them to congregate, kind of abandon, if you will, the old metrics, if you can think about it, of so many people standing, so many people sitting. We used to use those guidelines to size facilities, and rows of black mesian, that is a term, chairs. You can picture it in an old terminal or even a new one, those black slingback chairs. People tend to use them as encampments. They tend to put luggage everywhere to isolate themselves. They don't really work very well. So use the space effectively to provide good seating for campers, and then keep concessions in view. Take the walls down between the hold room and what typically would be a slot or demising wall concession, a coffee shop. Why not take the wall down so the coffee shop leads into the hold room or the departure lounge, or the same with, an eating establishment. And, the Explorer, the ways you kind of deal with them in design, and airport operators are doing a great job, is that people do come to the airport early. They do like the amenities that airports put out there that are quote unquote luxury. They do like to go to the airport to see the exhibit that they've secured from the local museum. These are things that airports are doing to address the Explorer and all of these, I think, right now. And I think that the continuation of that is only going to strengthen is only going to meet the expectation that we have as we move through facilities today.
So what are the biggest design mistakes airports make today when trying to accommodate multiple passenger behaviors?
Well, I think one of the mistakes that airports make is I think sometimes that they can get kind of, and it's okay, caught up in sort of, this is the way we've done it and this is the way it's got to be, right? That there's a certain habitual sort of cookie cutter approach, I think, at times to terminal planning. Even myself, I find myself in a new project, kind of resorting to, sort of old behaviors, which are good behaviors. They're just ingrained in me on how to provide the adequate level of service for a passenger in a facility. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes airports make is that they don't really think outside the box early, right? They really don't test. And I get completely that there is a certain limitation to capital expenditures and providing test case scenarios, if you will, for trying to provide passengers with unique and or different types of experiences. But I think that complacency and kind of doing things the same way is a trap that airports can fall into when we are literally on the verge of evolution in technology, innovation, and all kinds of different customer potential experiences. So I would say that would be the biggest one, is trying trying to put yourself in a neutral position when you're making decisions about what kind of facility you're going to provide, and maybe extend your arm out a little bit and grab onto some of the new and interesting ideas that are out there.
From an operational standpoint, how can airports dynamically respond to shifts in passenger mix throughout the day?
Well, that's interesting because passenger mixes do change throughout the day, right? There are peak hours throughout the day in every airport, and those peaks are different types of passengers, right? So, for example, in what we call an origin and destination market, there's a morning push, there's an evening, arrival bank that comes into the terminal. A lot of business travelers in the morning, a lot of business travelers at night, and I think that when you have this kind of mix throughout the day, the success for airport operators comes in making sure that your concessions can provide what the needs are for those passengers throughout the day, but a little bit more modularity and flexibility in addressing passengers, in the peaks and the types of passengers in those peaks. For example, I've heard some origin and destination airports, Joe, that's a term where it's not a hub, right? That the morning push and the people get there so early, like 5 in the morning, security's opened at 5, and they get through the concession and there's no coffee. There's nowhere to get a cup of coffee because they haven't opened up the concessionaires yet. That is something that, has to change. And if you can't do it because of contracts and things like that, can you provide some sort of mobile concession opportunity? I think that modularity and nimbleness in concessions is going to be the wave of the future. We're already seeing it in some of the terminals that we design. Remember that it doesn't take much now. You don't need to plug in a cash register to have a point of sale contact machine with a mobile card. And you can get creative, I think. Concession operators can get creative or be asked to get creative about putting things in front of the customer or putting them in range of the customer during those peak periods to address specific groups of customers.
What opportunities exist to personalize the passenger journey, particularly for explorers and campers, to drive engagement and revenue?
Well, I think that all comes down to digital technology. I mean, 87% of passengers prefer to purchase their airline ticket on the computer. They have their phone in their hand. They've got, maybe 3 different apps open, right? And let's talk about that for a second. They might have the app open for the airport. They might have a TSA app open. They definitely have their airline app open, right? What are the opportunities to address campers and roamers and these kinds of people when it comes to concessions and revenue generating opportunity? It's on your phone, I think. I think that is the first line of attack, if you will, to meet people's needs. I mean, how many times can you be a business traveler? How many business travelers, should I say, are in an Uber? They're in a hurry, right? And they left their phone charger in the office at the meeting. They would definitely like a sandwich before they get on that plane. But, security is held up a little bit and they get through it. And they've got, because they've cut it close, 15 minutes to get to the gate. What can airport operators do to address that need? I mean, we see a lot of, online shopping pickup places in grocery stores and things like that. Can't we do something like that becomes a universal accepted point of pickup, point of sale, where that passenger or that customer gets the things that they need before they hit the boarding door gate? I think that, we know we can track you if you obviously opt in to an airport's database. Airports are collecting information on passengers to provide better experiences for them. And I think using digital technology to kind of push notifications, to push opportunities to purchase and to alert passengers, not just on delays, but, hey, if you need something, go here and get it. And by the way, it's on your way to the gate and you can pick it up here. Something like that is is in evolution, I think. I have not seen it executed perfectly yet, but I think that the digital transformation of the phone into a sort of one and all point of sale for anything at an airport is something that is coming, and it should be championed.
As traffic grows towards 5.2 billion passengers globally,
Oh,
how should this persona-based approach influence long-term capital improvement programs?
I think that when you know these kind of passenger types, and as the industry grows to this extraordinary number of passengers in the next, I don't know what the time frame is, 20, 30 years, uh, the behavioral pattern types are really important to accelerate and to maintain high dwell times in facilities, right? I'm a little bit troubled, Joe, that I see the metrics coming back that, one-third of Americans, at least this small sample size, are really coming to the airport so close. Because what that's doing is that's saying to us as airport operators, architects, and designers, I don't really like the terminal, right? Now, we know that we don't like the checkpoint, right? And the TSA has been a good partner with many airports, but we all have a long way to go. The checkpoint of today should not be the checkpoint of tomorrow. That is the single most stressful point of activity in an airport. We need to do a better job, I think, of taking specific spaces that we pass through, no matter what type, security being one of them, and make them much less industrial, hospital grade. They don't. There is no reason why a security checkpoint can't be warm and inviting. In fact, if you go to Europe and you get a fast track pass to go through a VIP security because you're an elite status on an airline, it's a different experience. We've learned that breaking up checkpoints so you don't see to the left or the right 20 lanes, breaking them up into quadrants or different types of pods does relieve stress. So understanding the passenger types as we continue to build facilities, excellent facilities, is only gonna help you airport operators understand that they're meeting, again, that word, a customer's expectations, right? And when you meet a customer's expectations, they may not be in such a hurry to go through your facility. They may linger longer if you're providing extraordinary concession opportunities and interesting amenities like airports are doing. If you continue to do that, I think that you're going to see that, the spend per plane and plane passenger is going to up. You're going to see satisfaction surveys, particularly pay particular attention to the number one culprit of dissatisfaction is the restroom, right? Continuing to understand people's behavioral patterns and taking into account, them is going to make your facility a lot better and best in class.
Thanks for tuning in to the Aviation Pros podcast, produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. Stay ahead in airport operations and leadership by subscribing to our Airport Business Daily newsletter and our monthly Airport Business Insider newsletter, only available to key decision makers in aviation. And don't forget to explore even more at AviationPros.com, the home of exclusive content for aviation professionals like yourself. I'm Joe Petrie. We'll catch you next time.